The December wind cut through Victoria's threadbare shawl like a knife as she stumbled down the frozen main street of Oklahoma City, her lips tinged blue, and her fingers so numb she could barely feel them anymore. She had been walking for 3 days straight since losing her job at the boarding house, and the little money she had saved vanished when a thief cut her bag loose while she slept under a storefront awning 2 nights back. Now, with the temperature dropping and snow beginning to fall in thick, heavy flakes, she knew she might not survive another night outdoors in this merciless January of 1881. Victoria's stomach cramped with hunger as she passed by a restaurant window where families sat eating hot meals, their laughter and warmth seeming like memories from another lifetime. She had been so careful with her money after arriving in Oklahoma City 6 months ago from Missouri, working hard at the boarding house, sending a little back to her younger sister, who still lived with their aunt. But when the boarding house owner's nephew returned from back east and needed a job, Victoria found herself dismissed without warning or severance. The room she rented went with the job, and suddenly she had nothing. She pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little good against the wind that howled down the street. Her thin dress, once a pretty blue cotton that matched her eyes, was now stained and torn at the hem. Her chestnut hair, usually pinned neatly, hung in tangled waves down her back. She caught her reflection in a shop window and barely recognized the gaunt, desperate woman staring back. She was 22 years old, and she looked like a ghost. The street was emptying as darkness fell and the storm intensified. Shop owners locked their doors and hurried home. Families pulled curtains closed against the cold. Victoria's steps grew slower, more uncertain. Her vision blurred at the edges, whether from cold or hunger or exhaustion she could not tell. She thought about her sister, Sarah, only 19 and still innocent of how cruel the world could be. Victoria had tried so hard to make something of herself out here, to prove that a woman alone could survive, could thrive even. Instead, she was dying slowly on a frozen street while the world shut its doors. She did not know how long she walked, her feet moving out of pure instinct, before she found herself at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Through the swirling snow, she could make out a sturdy wooden house with smoke rising from its chimney. Light glowed in the windows, warm and inviting. A barn stood nearby, and she could hear horses moving inside, restless in the storm. Her body moved toward that light without conscious thought, drawn like a moth to flame. Victoria collapsed on the porch steps, her legs finally giving out. She tried to pull herself up, to knock on the door and beg for shelter, but her arms would not obey. The cold was everywhere now, seeping into her bones, making her sleepy. She thought maybe she would just rest here a moment, just close her eyes for a second, and then she would find the strength to knock. The snow fell on her face, soft as kisses, and she let her eyes drift closed. She did not hear the door open, or the sharp intake of breath from the man who found her there. She did not feel the strong arms that lifted her or the warmth that enveloped her as she was carried inside. The world had gone dark and far away, and Victoria Flynn drifted in that darkness, not knowing if she would ever find her way back to the light. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, accompanied by sensations that seemed impossible. Warmth, softness, the crackle of a fire. Victoria's eyes fluttered open, and she found herself lying on a sofa pulled close to a stone fireplace where flames danced and threw golden light across the room. Heavy quilts were piled on top of her, and she was wearing a nightshirt that was far too large, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Her own dress hung drying near the fire, steam rising from the fabric. "Easy now," a deep voice said, and Victoria turned her head to see a man kneeling beside the sofa. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was angular and weathered from outdoor work, but his expression held genuine concern. "You gave me quite a scare. Found you on my porch about frozen solid. How are you feeling?" Victoria tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The man seemed to understand and moved away, returning moments later with a cup of warm broth. He helped her sit up enough to drink, supporting her shoulders with one hand while holding the cup with the other. The broth tasted like heaven, rich and salty, warming her from the inside. "Slow sips," he cautioned when she tried to drink too fast. "Your body needs time to adjust. When did you last eat?" "2 days," Victoria managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. "Maybe 3. I lost track." The man's jaw tightened, but he did not press for details. He let her finish the broth, then helped her lie back down, tucking the quilts around her with surprising gentleness for such large, work-roughened hands. "I'm Asher Dalton," he said. "This is my ranch about 2 miles outside Oklahoma City proper. You're safe here. We'll get some food in you and let you warm up, and then we can talk about whatever situation brought you to my doorstep in the middle of a blizzard." "Victoria," she whispered. "Victoria Flynn. I'm so sorry for the intrusion. I did not mean to collapse on your porch." "I was trying to knock to ask for help, but I could not seem to move." "No apologies necessary," Asher said firmly. "I'm just glad I went out to check the barn when I did. Another hour and—" He trailed off, but they both knew what he meant. Another hour and she would have frozen to death on his porch, a tragedy that would have haunted both of them in different ways. Victoria wanted to stay awake, to thank him properly, to explain herself, but exhaustion pulled at her like a tide. Her eyes grew heavy despite her best efforts to keep them open. "Sleep," Asher said softly, rising to his feet. "You're completely safe. I'll be right here in the house if you need anything." She wanted to protest, to insist she could not impose any further, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. She sank into darkness again, but this time it was the soft darkness of genuine rest, not the dangerous cold that had threatened to claim her before. When Victoria woke again, pale morning light filtered through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything outside looked clean and pristine, like a fresh start. She pushed herself up on the sofa, her body aching but no longer dangerously cold. The fire had been maintained through the night, still burning steadily in the fireplace. She heard sounds from another room, the clatter of dishes and the smell of something wonderful cooking. Her stomach growled fiercely in response. She looked down at the nightshirt she wore, clearly belonging to Asher, and felt her cheeks flush. He must have changed her out of her wet clothes to save her life, but the intimacy of it made her feel vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Asher appeared in the doorway carrying a tray, and his face brightened when he saw her awake. "Good morning. I was hoping you would wake up hungry. I've got eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee. Think you can manage some real food?" "I think I could eat everything you have in your kitchen," Victoria admitted, and was rewarded with a warm laugh that seemed to fill the room. He set the tray on her lap, and she tried very hard not to attack the food like a wild animal. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy, the biscuits still warm with butter melting into them. She had never tasted anything so good in her entire life. Asher sat in a chair nearby, nursing his own cup of coffee and watching her with an expression that held both amusement and something softer. "Where are you from originally?" he asked, once she had taken the edge off her hunger. "Missouri," Victoria said between bites. "A little town called Liberty. I came here 6 months ago for work." I had a position at the Riverside boarding house, but I lost it 3 weeks ago. Lost my room with it. I have been trying to find something else, but no one wants to hire someone with no references and no place to stay. It became a terrible cycle. I spent what little savings I had on a room at a different boarding house, then that money ran out. I thought maybe if I could just hold on until spring, but the cold. She trailed off, not wanting to relive those desperate days. You have no family here? Asher asked gently. No family anywhere except my younger sister Sarah, and she is back in Missouri with our aunt. Our parents died when I was 18. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I've been working ever since, trying to make enough to bring Sarah out here eventually, to give us both a better life. Victoria set down her fork, her appetite suddenly dimmed by the weight of her failures. I've made a mess of everything instead. You survived, Asher said firmly. That takes more strength than you probably realize. This territory eats up people who give up, but you kept going even when you had every reason to quit. That's not making a mess of things. That's being remarkably brave. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at his words. She had been so focused on her failures that she had not thought about what it meant that she was still here, still breathing, still trying. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the kind words, but for saving my life. If you had not found me—" "But I did find you," Asher interrupted, his tone leaving no room for darker thoughts. "And now we need to figure out what comes next. The storm dumped about a foot of snow out there, so the roads into town will be difficult for a few days. You're welcome to stay here until the weather clears and you regain your strength. After that, we can talk about finding you proper work and lodging." The offer was generous, almost too generous. Victoria had learned to be wary of men who offered too much, knowing they often expected payment of a very specific kind. But something in Asher's straightforward manner, in the way he looked at her with respect rather than hunger, made her want to trust him. "I do not want to be a burden," she said carefully. "If I stay, I should work. I can cook and clean, mend clothes, tend a garden. I am not afraid of hard work." Asher considered this, then nodded. "I could use help with the house, that's true enough. I'm not much of a cook beyond the basics, and this place could use a woman's touch. If you are comfortable with that arrangement, we can work out fair wages. But first, you need to recover your health. No use trying to work when you can barely stand." It was a fair offer, perhaps more fair than she had any right to expect. Victoria agreed, and they settled into an arrangement that felt surprisingly natural. She spent that first day mostly resting, her body recovering from its ordeal. Asher went about his ranch work, tending to his horses and cattle, checking fences and clearing snow from essential paths. When he came in for lunch, he brought a cheerful energy that seemed to warm the house as much as the fire did. "Tell me about your ranch," Victoria said as they ate together at his kitchen table. It felt strange and wonderful to sit at a real table again, to have a proper meal in good company. Asher's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I've got about 300 acres here, with a small herd of cattle and 8 horses. I breed and train horses mostly, sell them to ranchers and the army. It is good, honest work, and the land is beautiful when it is not trying to freeze you solid. I bought this place 2 years ago with money I saved from working trail drives. Always wanted to have my own place, to build something lasting." "It must be lonely out here by yourself," Victoria observed. "Sometimes," Asher admitted, "but I stay busy enough that I do not dwell on it. I've got neighbors a few miles in each direction, good people. And I go into town regularly for supplies and to socialize a bit. It is not a bad life, just a quiet one." Over the next few days, as Victoria grew stronger, she began to understand just how much work Asher did on his own. He was up before dawn every morning, tending to the animals regardless of weather. He repaired equipment, mended fences, hauled water, chopped wood, and did 100 other tasks that kept the ranch running. He did it all with a steady determination that she found admirable. Victoria started helping where she could, despite Asher's protests that she should rest more. She cooked proper meals, hearty stews and fresh bread that filled the house with welcoming smells. She washed and mended his clothes, organized his chaotic kitchen, and brought a sense of order to the house that it clearly had been lacking. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, sharing stories of their lives. She learned that Asher had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had a ranch there, but with 3 older brothers to inherit, Asher knew he needed to make his own way. He had worked hard, saved every penny, and headed to Oklahoma Territory when he heard about available land. He spoke of his family with warmth but no regret about leaving, clearly a man who made peace with his choices. Asher learned that Victoria had always loved reading, that she dreamed of owning a bookshop someday, a place where people could discover stories and ideas. She told him about Sarah, about how her sister loved music and could play piano beautifully despite never having formal lessons. She spoke of her parents with both love and grief, the loss still fresh even after 4 years. A week passed, then 2. The snow melted enough for the roads to clear, but neither of them mentioned Victoria leaving. She had settled into the rhythm of the ranch, and Asher seemed happier for her presence. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and falling into comfortable patterns. She would have coffee ready when he came in from morning chores. He would bring her wildflowers he found on his rides around the property. Small gestures that felt increasingly significant. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Asher looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need to be honest with you about something," he said, his voice serious. "When I first brought you in from the cold, I thought I was just helping someone in need. That was the right thing to do, nothing more complicated than that. But these past weeks, having you here, talking with you every evening, watching you bring life to this house. Victoria, I'm developing feelings for you. Real feelings. And I need to know if that is something that makes you uncomfortable, because if it does, I will do my absolute best to keep things purely professional between us." Victoria's heart hammered in her chest. She had been trying not to acknowledge her own growing feelings, telling herself that gratitude and attraction were not the same thing as love. But sitting here in the firelight, looking at this good, honest man who had saved her life and treated her with such respect, she could not deny the truth anymore. "It does not make me uncomfortable," she said softly. "It makes me hopeful. I have feelings for you too, Asher. I was afraid to admit it, afraid that you would think I was only interested because you helped me, because I owe you so much. But it is more than that. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. When I think about leaving here, about finding work in town and living somewhere else, my heart breaks a little." Asher crossed the space between them in 2 strides, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "Then do not leave. Stay here with me. Not as an employee, not as someone working off a debt, but as someone I am courting properly. Let me show you what kind of life we could build together." "Asher, are you sure?" Victoria asked, needing him to understand what he was offering. "I came to you with nothing. I have no dowry, no family connections, no reputation to speak of. Some people will say you are foolish for taking up with a woman who is homeless and desperate." "Then let them say it," Asher replied fiercely. "I do not care what small-minded people think. I care about the woman who fought to survive against impossible odds. I care about the woman who brings music and warmth into my home. I care about you, Victoria Flynn, exactly as you are. She cupped his face in her hands, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and made her choice. She leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded with equal passion. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Victoria was smiling wider than she had in years. "I would very much like to stay," she said. "I would very much like to see where this leads." The winter weeks that followed felt like a dream to Victoria, the kind of dream she had stopped letting herself have somewhere along the hard road of survival. Asher courted her with old-fashioned devotion, riding into town to bring her small gifts, books she mentioned wanting to read, ribbons for her hair, chocolate that melted on her tongue. He took her on rides around the ranch property, showing her every corner of the land he loved, pointing out where the wildflowers would bloom in spring and where the best fishing spots were along the creek. They held hands as they walked through the snow, their breath misting in the cold air. They sat close by the fire in the evenings, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes simply enjoying each other's presence in comfortable silence. Asher kissed her often, sweet kisses that promised everything and demanded nothing, letting their relationship unfold at a natural pace. Victoria wrote to her sister, a long letter explaining everything that had happened. She was careful to portray events honestly, not wanting Sarah to worry but needing to share this incredible turn her life had taken. Sarah's response came 3 weeks later, full of relief and joy. She wrote that she was so happy Victoria had found someone good, someone who valued her as she deserved. She also mentioned that their aunt's health was failing, and she was worried about what would come next. Victoria showed the letter to Asher, and without hesitation he said, "Bring her here. We have plenty of room, and I would like to meet the sister you speak of so fondly. If she needs a home, she has one here." "Asher, you cannot just keep taking in stray Flynn women," Victoria said, though her heart swelled at his generosity. "What will people think?" "They'll think I am a lucky man," Asher replied, pulling her close. "And they would be right. Besides, you have told me Sarah is only 19 and alone in the world except for an ailing aunt. What kind of man would I be if I did not offer help when I could provide it? We'll bring her out in the spring when travel is easier." Victoria threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed with love for this man who kept surprising her with his kindness. "Have I told you today that you are wonderful?" "Once or twice," Asher said with a grin, "but I never get tired of hearing it." February gave way to March, and with the changing month came the first real hints of spring. The snow receded, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. Birds returned, filling the air with song. The ranch came alive with activity as calves were born, and the horses grew restless with the warmer weather. Victoria helped where she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered she had a knack for handling the horses, speaking to them in soft tones that seemed to calm even the most spirited animals. Asher taught her to ride properly, not side saddle as society dictated, but astride like a ranch woman, practical and free. She loved the feeling of galloping across open land, the wind in her hair, and the powerful animal beneath her responding to her commands. She also took over the garden plot behind the house, preparing the soil and planning what to plant. She wanted vegetables for their table, but also flowers, beauty for the sake of beauty. Asher built her a small greenhouse where she could start seeds, working on it in the evenings and presenting it to her as a surprise. She cried when she saw it, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that this man listened to every small thing she mentioned, remembered every dream she shared, and tried to make them reality. One evening in late March, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Asher took her hand and went very quiet. Victoria waited, sensing something important was coming. "Victoria," he began, then stopped and cleared his throat. "I had a whole speech planned, something eloquent and romantic, but sitting here with you, the words seem unnecessary. These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. You have transformed this house into a home, and you have transformed me into a better man. I know we have not been together long by traditional standards, but out here, time moves differently. When something is right, you know it in your bones." He slid off his chair and knelt in front of her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside sat a gold ring with a small diamond that caught the fading light. "Victoria Flynn, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you build this life with me, face whatever comes together, grow old on this land we both love? I promise to cherish you every day, to support your dreams, to be the man you deserve. Say yes and make me the happiest man in Oklahoma Territory." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of pure joy. She had gone from freezing to death on a stranger's porch to being proposed to by the man she loved more than she thought possible. Life could turn on such strange hinges, could shift from tragedy to miracle in the space of a few months. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Asher Dalton, and I cannot imagine a future that does not have you in it." Asher slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, the sun had set completely, leaving them in the soft purple light of dusk. They planned a simple wedding for early May, giving them time to make preparations and for Sarah to travel from Missouri. Asher rode into Oklahoma City the next day to make arrangements with the local preacher and to share their news with his neighbors. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people offering to help with everything from the wedding meal to decorations for the ceremony. There were a few raised eyebrows from those who remembered seeing Victoria in her desperate state that winter, and a few whispers about the speed of the courtship. But Asher addressed them with calm directness. "Victoria was down on her luck when we met," he said to anyone who questioned their relationship. "But she has proven herself to be hardworking, kind, and everything I could want in a partner. Anyone who has a problem with my choice of bride can take it up with me directly, and I assure you that conversation will not go well for them." His fierce defense of her reputation silenced most critics, and the rest learned to keep their opinions to themselves. Victoria was grateful, but also found she cared less about what others thought than she once had. She knew her own worth now, knew that she had survived impossible circumstances and come out stronger. Their opinions could not touch the happiness she had found. Sarah arrived in late April, having made the journey with a family friend who was traveling west for business. Victoria met her at the stagecoach stop in Oklahoma City, barely recognizing the young woman who stepped down from the coach. Sarah had always been pretty, but hardship had refined her features, adding maturity to her face. The sisters embraced, both crying, both talking at once. "I cannot believe you are getting married," Sarah said through happy tears. "I cannot believe any of this. When I got your first letter, I thought perhaps the cold had affected your mind and you were imagining things." "It is all very real," Victoria assured her, linking arms with her sister. "Come, Asher is waiting with the wagon. I cannot wait for you to meet him." The meeting between Asher and Sarah went well, with both being slightly shy at first but warming to each other quickly. Asher treated Sarah with the same easy respect he showed Victoria, making it clear she was not an inconvenience but a welcome addition to their household. On the ride back to the ranch, Sarah peppered them with questions, wanting to know every detail of their romance. "It sounds like something from a novel," she declared when they had finished telling the story. "The mysterious cowboy who rescues the desperate maiden and falls in love with her." "You should write it down, Victoria. Future generations would never believe it otherwise." "I am still living it, and I barely believe it myself," Victoria admitted, smiling at Asher, who reached over and squeezed her hand. Having Sarah there made the house feel even more complete. The two sisters fell back into their old rhythms, talking late into the night, helping each other with daily tasks, sharing secrets and dreams. Sarah revealed that their aunt had passed away peacefully 2 weeks after Victoria's letter arrived, and Sarah had been staying with neighbors while arranging to join her sister out west. "I felt so alone," Sarah confessed one night as they prepared for bed in the room they were sharing until after the wedding. "Aunt Louise was kind, but she was not family the way you are. I kept thinking about how you almost died out here, and how I almost lost the only real family I have left. It terrified me. But we are both here now," Victoria said, hugging her sister close. "And we are going to be fine. Better than fine. We are going to build beautiful lives here." The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, warm sunshine and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. They held the ceremony at the ranch, with the preacher coming from town along with about 30 neighbors and friends. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Asher had picked that morning. Asher stood waiting for her in his best suit, his eyes shining with emotion as she walked toward him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with absolute sincerity. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Asher kissed her with such tenderness that several women in attendance wiped away tears. The celebration afterward was joyful and boisterous, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Neighbors brought dishes to share, and someone produced a fiddle, filling the air with lively tunes. Victoria danced with Asher, with several of the neighboring ranchers, and most enthusiastically with Sarah, both sisters laughing until they could barely breathe. As the sun set and the party showed no signs of slowing, Asher pulled Victoria away from the crowd, leading her to the porch where they could have a moment of relative quiet. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Victoria said, leaning back against him. "This morning I was thinking about last winter, about how close I came to dying. And now here I am, married to the most wonderful man, with my sister safe, with a home and a future, and everything I thought I had lost forever. It feels like magic." "Not magic," Asher said softly. "Just life doing what it does best, surprising us when we least expect it. I love you, Mrs. Dalton. I loved you from the moment you opened those blue eyes and looked at me like I was a miracle, when really you were the miracle all along." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Behind them, the party continued, full of laughter and life. Ahead of them stretched years of possibility, of challenges to face and joys to celebrate, all of it waiting to unfold. The wedding night was everything it should be, tender and passionate, two people coming together with love and trust. Asher treated Victoria like she was precious, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking in whispers about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Asher admitted. "Lots of them running around this ranch, learning to ride, helping with chores, filling this house with noise and chaos." "I want that too," Victoria said. "I want to give them the stable, loving home I lost too soon. I want them to know they are valued and safe." "They will," Asher promised. "We will make sure of it." The first year of their marriage unfolded with the changing seasons, bringing both challenges and triumphs. Sarah settled into life on the ranch, discovering a talent for raising chickens and managing the household finances. She proved to be invaluable during the busy summer months when Asher hired temporary hands for the harvest, and Victoria needed help feeding everyone. By autumn, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Asher one evening after supper, watching his face transform with wonder and delight. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with such reverence that it made her cry happy tears. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Victoria, you have just made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter, with Victoria remaining healthy and active despite Asher's tendency to treat her like she was made of glass. She continued her work around the ranch until the final month, when her size made most tasks difficult. Sarah stepped up to handle the things Victoria could no longer manage, proving herself to be a capable and willing helper. In early March of 1882, just over a year since Asher had proposed, Victoria went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, but Asher stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming lustily, both parents wept with relief and joy. They named him James, after Asher's father, and the baby immediately became the center of their world. Asher proved to be a devoted father, taking night feedings without complaint and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Victoria discovered that motherhood suited her, despite the exhaustion and the steep learning curve. "He has your eyes," she told Asher one afternoon as they sat together, both watching James sleep in his cradle. "And your stubborn streak," Asher replied with a laugh. "Listen to how loud he screams when he wants something. That is pure determination right there." Sarah adored her nephew, spending hours singing to him and playing with him. She had also caught the attention of a neighboring rancher's son, a young man named Thomas who came by frequently with increasingly transparent excuses for visiting. Victoria and Asher exchanged amused glances whenever Thomas showed up, recognizing young love when they saw it. "Should we invite him to supper?" Victoria asked Asher after Thomas's third visit in a week. "I think we should invite him to be honest about his intentions," Asher replied. "He is a good man from a good family. If Sarah is interested, I have no objections to them courting properly." The conversation with Thomas was brief and awkward, with the young man turning bright red but admitting that, yes, he very much wanted permission to court Sarah. Sarah, when asked, blushed just as fiercely but said yes with enthusiasm. By summer's end, they were engaged, planning a wedding for the following spring. Life continued its forward march, bringing changes and growth. The ranch prospered under Asher's careful management and Victoria's organizational skills. They added more cattle, improved their breeding stock, and gained a reputation for quality horses. Money, which had once been a source of constant anxiety for Victoria, became something they had enough of to be comfortable without being extravagant. Victoria realized she was pregnant again when James was 18 months old. This pregnancy felt different from the first, easier in some ways but more exhausting as she chased after an energetic toddler. When their daughter Mary was born in the summer of 1883, she came quickly, arriving so fast that the doctor barely made it in time. She was tiny and perfect, with dark hair like her father and a calm temperament that contrasted sharply with her brother's energetic nature. Sarah married Thomas in April of 1884, in a ceremony held at the same spot where Victoria and Asher had exchanged vows. The young couple built a house on Thomas's family ranch, only a few miles away, close enough for frequent visits. Victoria missed having her sister in the house daily, but was happy to see Sarah building her own life, her own family. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing family. Victoria gave birth to another son, Robert, in 1885, and a second daughter, Emma, in 1887. Their house rang with the sounds of children laughing, playing, sometimes fighting, always living fully. Asher proved to be a patient and loving father, teaching his children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, instilling in them a love for the land and respect for hard work. Victoria created the home she had always dreamed of, full of books and warmth and love. She taught her children to read from an early age, filling their heads with stories and ideas. She maintained her garden, which had grown into something quite spectacular, with vegetables feeding the family and flowers beautifying the property. She occasionally went into town to help at the small library that had been established, sharing her love of books with the growing community. Oklahoma Territory continued to develop around them, with more families settling the area, more businesses opening in Oklahoma City. The wild lawlessness that had characterized the earlier years gave way to a more civilized society, though the land retained its challenging nature. Droughts and hard winters tested them regularly, but Asher's careful planning and Victoria's thriftiness helped them weather the difficult times. One evening in the summer of 1890, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set, Victoria reflected on how much her life had changed in less than a decade. She was 31 years old now, a wife and mother of 4, secure in a way she had never imagined possible during those desperate days of winter 1880. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked, reaching over to take her hand. At 35, he had filled out some. The lean cowboy she had met, now a solid rancher with the first threads of silver in his dark hair. "I am thinking about the night you found me," Victoria said honestly. "About how I was certain I was going to die, and how instead I found everything I had been searching for without knowing it. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you opened your door, that you saw past the desperate woman on your porch to the person I could become." "I am grateful you stumbled onto my porch," Asher replied. "Though I wish the circumstances had been less dire. You saved me too, you know. I was slowly turning into a hermit out here, forgetting what it meant to share life with someone. You reminded me. You gave me a family, a real home, a purpose beyond just surviving and building wealth." Their eldest, James, came running around the corner of the house at that moment, chasing a frog and laughing. At 8 years old, he was a miniature version of his father, all energy and curiosity. Mary followed at a more sedate pace, at 7 already showing signs of being the responsible one. Robert, 5, rode his wooden stick horse with serious dedication, and 3-year-old Emma toddled behind her siblings, determined not to be left out despite her short legs. "Mama, Papa, look what I caught," James called, displaying his frog with pride. "Very impressive," Asher called back. "Make sure you let him go before supper. Frogs need to get home to their families too. Can I keep him just tonight?" James pleaded, a request that had been made and denied with various creatures at least 100 times before. "You know the rule," Victoria said firmly. "Wild things belong in the wild. You can visit your frog friend down by the creek, but he does not live in our house." James sighed dramatically but nodded, already running back toward the creek with his siblings in tow. Victoria and Asher watched them go, both smiling. "We did good," Asher said softly. "We did very good," Victoria agreed. Sarah and Thomas had 2 children by then, a boy and a girl, and the cousins spent as much time together as possible. Sunday dinners often found both families gathering at one ranch or the other, sharing meals and stories. Sarah had blossomed into a confident woman, happy in her marriage and in her role as mother and ranch wife. The sisters remained close, their bond strengthened rather than weakened by their separate lives. In 1891, Victoria surprised herself by getting involved in the territorial suffrage movement, attending meetings, and even speaking publicly about women's rights. Asher encouraged her involvement, watching their children when she needed to travel to Oklahoma City for meetings, expressing pride in her advocacy. "You have a gift for speaking," he told her after attending one of her speeches. "People listen when you talk about your experiences, about how easily a woman can fall into poverty without rights or protections. You are making a difference. I just want our daughters to grow up in a world where they have choices," Victoria said. "Where they do not have to depend entirely on a man's goodwill to survive. I was lucky that you were a good man, Asher. Not every woman is so lucky." The 1890s brought both progress and challenges to the territory. The land run of 1889 had brought thousands of new settlers, and there was talk of Oklahoma becoming a state eventually. The ranch faced competition from larger operations, but Asher's reputation for quality and fair dealing kept them prosperous. They weathered a severe drought in 1893 that devastated some of their neighbors, their careful water management practices saving their herd when others lost everything. They also faced personal sorrows. Victoria had 2 miscarriages in the mid-1890s, heartbreaking losses that left her grieving for the children who would never be. Asher held her through those dark times, his strength and love pulling her through. Their existing children, growing older and more aware, rallied around their mother with touching compassion. "We still have so much to be grateful for," Asher reminded her gently during the second loss. "4 beautiful, healthy children, each other, this life we built. It is okay to grieve what we lost, but do not let it overshadow what we have." His words, spoken with love rather than dismissal, helped Victoria find her way back to equilibrium. She poured herself into her children, her advocacy work, and her partnership with Asher, finding healing in the daily acts of living and loving. By 1898, James was 16 and working the ranch alongside his father, already showing the leadership qualities that would serve him well. Mary at 15 was teaching at the small school that had been established in the growing community, her patience and intelligence making her a natural educator. Robert at 13 was developing into a skilled horseman, with plans to train horses professionally. Emma at 11 was still exploring her interests, flitting between helping her mother in the garden, spending time with the horses, and reading every book she could get her hands on. Victoria and Asher watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and the bittersweet awareness that their time of all being together under one roof was limited. James had started courting a neighboring rancher's daughter, and wedding bells would likely ring within a few years. Mary had attracted attention from several young men, though she seemed more interested in her teaching than in marriage at the moment. "They are going to leave us," Victoria said one night, the thought both happy and sad. "That is what we raised them to do," Asher replied. "To be confident, capable people who can build their own lives. We did not keep them close out of fear. We gave them wings." "When did you become so wise?" Victoria teased. "The day I found a half-frozen woman on my porch and was smart enough to bring her inside," Asher replied with a grin. "Best decision I ever made." As the new century approached, there was a sense of change in the air. Oklahoma Territory was evolving rapidly, and statehood seemed inevitable in the coming years. The wild frontier of their youth was becoming settled, civilized, connected to the larger nation by railroad and telegraph. It was not necessarily worse, just different, the rough edges smoothed away by time and progress. On the evening of December 31, 1899, the family gathered on their porch to watch the sunset on the old century. Sarah and Thomas and their children had ridden over to spend the evening, and the house was full of noise and laughter and life. Someone had made a cake to celebrate, and the children were allowed to stay up late to mark the occasion. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Asher stood and called for everyone's attention. The chatter died down, all eyes turning to him. "I want to say something before this century ends," he began, his voice carrying in the quiet night air. 20 years ago, I was alone in this house, working this land, thinking I was content with my solitary life. Then Victoria appeared in my life, quite literally at my doorstep, and everything changed. She brought love and partnership and family. She brought purpose beyond just work and survival. He turned to Victoria, taking her hands in his. "You have given me 20 years of happiness, my love. 20 years of waking up grateful that I checked the barn that snowy night and found you. 20 years of watching you transform from a desperate woman with nothing into the strongest, most remarkable person I know. 20 years of building this life together, of raising these incredible children, of facing every challenge as a team." His voice grew thick with emotion. "As we stand on the edge of a new century, I want everyone here to know that my greatest accomplishment is not this ranch or any material success. It is being loved by Victoria Flynn Dalton. It is the family we created. It is the life we built from that single act of opening my door to someone in need." Victoria was crying openly now, and several others wiped at their eyes as well. She stood and kissed her husband, not caring who was watching, pouring 20 years of love into that single gesture. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. Then, now, always. The family celebrated together as midnight approached, counting down the final seconds of the old century. When the clock struck 12, they cheered and embraced, welcoming 1900 with joy and hope. Victoria stood with Asher's arm around her shoulders, surrounded by their children and extended family, and felt complete peace. She had come so far from that frozen, desperate woman on a stranger's porch. She had survived, thrived, and built something beautiful from the ashes of her lowest moment. The early years of the new century brought continued growth and change. James married in 1901, bringing his wife Rachel to live on the ranch while they saved money to buy their own place. Their first child, Asher's first grandchild, was born in 1902, a boy they named Asher in honor of his grandfather. Victoria held her grandson and marveled at the continuation of the life she and Asher had created. Mary married in 1903, surprising everyone by choosing a newspaper editor from Oklahoma City rather than a rancher. She moved to town with her husband, continuing her teaching while also writing articles about education and women's issues for her husband's paper. Victoria could not have been prouder of her daughter's independent spirit. Robert and Emma remained at home through the mid-1900s, both helping run the ranch as Asher began to slow down. He was past 50 now, his body bearing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. He never complained, but Victoria noticed him moving more stiffly in the mornings, taking longer to complete tasks that once came easily. She worried about him but knew better than to fuss too obviously. Instead, she made sure he rested when he needed to, that he ate well, that he took time to enjoy life rather than just working constantly. Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, a momentous occasion celebrated throughout the territory. Victoria and Asher attended the ceremonies in Guthrie, the temporary capital, watching history unfold. They held hands as speeches were made and celebrations erupted, both reflecting on the dramatic changes they had witnessed in their nearly 30 years in Oklahoma. "We helped build this," Victoria said with quiet pride. "All of us who came here and worked the land, raised families, created communities. We turned a territory into a state." "You especially," Asher replied. "Your work with the suffrage movement, with education, with helping other women in difficult situations. You made a real difference, Victoria." She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable after so many years together. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, had faced losses and celebrated triumphs, and through it all they had remained partners in the truest sense. They still talked for hours, still laughed together, still found joy in each other's company. The passion of their youth had mellowed into something deeper, steadier, no less meaningful for its quieter expression. Robert married in 1908, bringing his wife Clara to live on the ranch. Emma, surprising everyone, announced her intention to attend the university being established in Norman, one of the first women to do so. She wanted to study literature and writing, dreams that Victoria enthusiastically supported. "I am proud of you for following your heart," Victoria told her youngest daughter. "Do not let anyone tell you that education is wasted on a woman. Learn everything you can, experience everything available to you, and then decide what kind of life you want to build." Emma threw her arms around her mother. "I learned that from watching you. You never let circumstances define you. You created your own path, and you taught me I could do the same." By 1910, Victoria and Asher were grandparents several times over, with more grandchildren arriving regularly. The ranch house, expanded twice over the years, often rang with the voices of visiting children and grandchildren. Sunday dinners had become major productions, with 3 generations gathering around tables pushed together, sharing food and stories and laughter. Sarah's son had started working at the ranch alongside Robert and James, learning the business with plans to eventually take over management. Victoria and Asher began talking seriously about stepping back, about letting the younger generation run things while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. "I am 51 years old," Victoria said one evening. "Somehow that seems impossible. I still feel like that terrified 22-year-old inside sometimes, the one who thought she was going to die in the cold." "You are nothing like that woman," Asher said gently. "You are strong, confident, successful in every way that matters. That young woman survived impossible circumstances, and she grew into someone remarkable." "We both grew," Victoria corrected. "We grew together, shaped each other, built this life as partners." "I could not have become who I am without you, Asher." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. They sat together in the gathering dusk, comfortable in the silence, secure in their love. The years continued their steady march. Victoria and Asher transitioned into advisory roles at the ranch, offering guidance but letting their sons handle the daily operations. They traveled some, visiting Sarah and her family, spending time in Oklahoma City with Mary and her growing brood, attending Emma's university graduation in 1912. Emma married that same year, choosing a fellow writer, and the young couple moved to Texas, where her husband had been offered a position at a newspaper. Victoria helped her youngest pack, feeling the bittersweet ache of watching her children scatter to build their own lives. "You are all going to make me cry," Victoria said, hugging Emma fiercely. "When did you all grow up and leave me?" "We will always come back," Emma promised. "This ranch, this place, it will always be home. You and Papa built something that will last, Mama. We carry it with us wherever we go." Victoria watched the wagon carry Emma and her new husband away, Asher's arm around her shoulders offering comfort and support. They stood there long after the wagon disappeared from view, both processing the passage of time and the evolution of their family. But if their children had grown and moved on, they filled the emptiness with new pursuits. Victoria became more involved in community activities, serving on committees for the school and library, mentoring young women who found themselves in difficult circumstances. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and without resources, and she used her position and influence to help others avoid that fate. Asher took up woodworking, creating beautiful furniture pieces that their children and grandchildren treasured. He also spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and work with horses, passing down the skills and knowledge he had accumulated over a lifetime. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in May of 1912, with a large party attended by family and friends from all over Oklahoma. The celebration took place at the ranch, the same spot where they had married 3 decades earlier. Speeches were made, toasts offered, and stories shared about the legendary romance of Asher and Victoria Dalton. "Tell us the story again," one of the grandchildren begged, "about how Grandpa found Grandma in the snow." Victoria and Asher exchanged glances, having told this story countless times over the years. But they never tired of it, never stopped marveling at the chain of events that had brought them together. Asher settled into his chair, gathering his grandchildren around him. "It was December of 1880, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. "The coldest winter anyone could remember. I was young and alone, working my new ranch and thinking I had everything figured out. Then one night, during a terrible blizzard, something made me decide to check on the barn before bed." Victoria listened to her husband tell their story, watching the grandchildren's faces light up with interest, despite having heard it many times before. She saw their own children listening too, smiling at the tale of their parents' beginning. She saw friends and neighbors leaning in, reminded of the power of small acts of kindness and the unpredictable nature of love. When Asher reached the part about finding her on his porch, he looked over at Victoria, his eyes as warm as they had been 30 years ago. "I brought her inside," he said softly, "and she brought the warmth back into my life. Best decision I ever made." "Best moment of my life," Victoria added, taking his hand, "even though I was unconscious for most of it." The crowd laughed, and the party continued late into the night. Victoria danced with Asher, with each of their sons, with grandchildren who stood on her feet and let her waltz them around. She danced with Thomas, with her sons-in-law, with old friends. She felt young again, full of joy and life and gratitude for the incredible journey that had begun with near tragedy and unfolded into this beautiful, complicated, wonderful life. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Victoria and Asher found themselves alone on their porch once again, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 30 years, Victoria mused. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean," Asher replied. "Some days, I still see that terrified young woman opening her eyes and looking at me like I was a miracle. Other days I look at you and see only who you are now, strong and confident and extraordinary. Both versions are real, both are you." "And I see both versions of you," Victoria said. "The young cowboy who opened his door to a stranger without hesitation, and the man you have become, wise and patient and endlessly loving. I love both versions, all versions, every moment we have shared." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts entwined as thoroughly as their lives had become. 3 decades of marriage had taught them that words were sometimes unnecessary, that the deepest communication happened in these quiet moments of simple presence. The years that followed brought the natural progression of aging, with its joys and sorrows. Asher's father passed away in 1914, and Victoria and Asher traveled to Texas for the funeral, reconnecting with his brothers and their families. Victoria's aunt, Sarah's former guardian, had died years earlier, leaving the sisters as the last of their immediate family line, though their children and grandchildren ensured the family name would continue. They faced health scares, Victoria with a bout of pneumonia in 1915 that worried everyone until she recovered. Asher with a broken leg from a riding accident in 1917 that left him limping slightly even after it healed. Each crisis reminded them of their mortality, of how precious their time together was. World War I touched their family when Emma's husband enlisted in 1917, leaving Emma and their young daughter to move back to the ranch for the duration. The worry about loved ones overseas, the rationing and restrictions, the fear that permeated everything, tested them all. But they faced it together, as a family, supporting each other through the difficult years. When the war ended in 1918, the celebration was muted by the knowledge of how many had been lost. Emma's husband returned safely, thank God, but they knew families who had not been so fortunate. The ranch opened its doors to a young widow, the wife of a ranch hand who had died in France, giving her work and a place to stay until she could get back on her feet. Victoria saw herself in the young woman's desperate circumstances and was determined to offer the same help Asher had given her decades earlier. The 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch and the family. The children were all established in successful lives. The grandchildren were growing and thriving, and Victoria and Asher enjoyed a comfortable semi-retirement. They were both past 60 now, their hair gray, their bodies bearing the marks of long lives well lived, but their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong. They took to sitting on their porch most evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked for over 40 years. They talked about everything and nothing, sometimes reminiscing about the past, sometimes discussing current events, sometimes simply commenting on the beauty of the sunset or the sound of the wind in the trees. "You have any regrets?" Victoria asked one evening in 1925, prompted by a conversation they had had with Sarah earlier that day about choices and roads not taken. Asher considered the question carefully before answering. "None about the big things. Marrying you, building this ranch, raising our family, those were all the right choices. I suppose I regret some smaller things, times I was short-tempered or impatient, moments I could have handled better. But regrets about my life's path? No. Everything led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." "I feel the same," Victoria said. "Even the hard parts, the desperate times before I met you, they shaped who I became. I learned resilience and compassion from suffering. I learned gratitude from having nothing and then being given everything. Would I want to repeat those experiences? No. But do I regret them? I cannot, because they made this life possible. We have been blessed," Asher said simply. "Far more blessed than we probably deserve." Their 45th anniversary in 1927 was celebrated with less fanfare than their 30th had been. A quiet family dinner rather than a large party. But it was no less meaningful, perhaps more so for its intimacy. Their children spoke about what their parents' marriage had taught them about love, partnership, and commitment. Their grandchildren, some now adults themselves, shared memories of their grandparents' kindness and wisdom. The oldest grandchildren were starting families of their own now, making Victoria and Asher great-grandparents, holding her first great-grandchild, A tiny girl with dark hair and bright eyes, Victoria felt the profound connection of generations, the continuation of life and love through time. "Your great-great-grandmother," she told the baby softly, knowing the child could not understand but needing to say it anyway. "She died when I was young, and I thought my family line might end with me and Sarah. But look at you, little one. Look at how we have grown and flourished. You are the proof that survival is not just about staying alive, but about creating life and love that extends beyond ourselves." Asher, watching his wife with their great-grandchild, felt his heart swell with love and pride. This woman, who had nearly died on his porch 47 years ago, had created this legacy. She had brought warmth and life not just to his house, but to an entire extended family, touching countless lives with her strength and compassion. They faced their 70s with the grace of people who had lived fully and well. Asher's health began declining in 1929, his heart growing weaker despite the doctor's best efforts. Victoria nursed him tenderly, determined to care for him as he had cared for her so many times over their decades together. "I am not ready to leave you," Asher admitted one night, his voice weak but his grip on her hand still strong. "There is so much I still want to say, so many more sunsets to watch together." "Then you will stay," Victoria said firmly, refusing to accept any other outcome. "You will fight and I will fight with you and we will have more time. We have beaten every other challenge together. We will beat this one too." And remarkably, he did improve, rallying in a way that surprised his doctors. Whether it was Victoria's fierce determination, his own stubborn will, or simply not being ready to let go of life yet, Asher regained enough strength to enjoy several more good years. They were slower years, gentler years, but no less precious for that. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in May of 1932, a true golden anniversary. The celebration was held at the ranch, with family traveling from across Oklahoma and beyond to attend. There were 4 generations present, from great-grandchildren to Victoria and Asher themselves, all connected by the love that had started with a simple act of kindness on a winter night long ago. Speeches were made, tears were shed, laughter rang out across the land. Someone had compiled a book of memories and photographs spanning their 50 years together, and Victoria spent hours poring over it, marveling at how young they had been, how much they had endured and enjoyed. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Victoria and Asher sat on their porch one more time, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring air. 50 years, Asher said wonderingly. "Half a century with you and it has not been enough. I want 50 more." "So do I," Victoria said, leaning against him. "But if we cannot have 50 more, I am grateful for the 50 we have had. You gave me everything, Asher. You gave me life when I was dying. You gave me love when I felt unlovable. You gave me a home when I was homeless. You gave me a family when I thought I would always be alone. You gave me myself, the woman I was meant to become." "You gave me all those same things," Asher replied. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. We saved each other and then we built this beautiful life together. That is the story I want remembered. Not just that I found you in the snow and brought you inside, but that we found each other and created something lasting." They sat together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and made a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. They had faced hardship and celebrated joy, weathered storms and basked in sunshine, always together, always partners. Asher passed away peacefully in his sleep in December of 1933, 3 days after the 53rd anniversary of the night he found Victoria on his porch. He was 78 years old, and he died as he had lived, with dignity and grace, surrounded by love. Victoria held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude, telling him it was all right to go, that she would be fine. But fine was perhaps too strong a word for what Victoria felt in the months after Asher's death. She grieved deeply, missing her partner, her love, her best friend. The house felt empty without him, the silences no longer comfortable but painful. She went through the motions of daily life, cared for by her children and grandchildren who worried about her, but inside she felt hollow. It was Emma who finally pulled her mother out of the worst of her grief, arriving for a visit and sitting Victoria down for a firm talk. "Mama, you taught me that we honor the people we love by living fully, not by dying slowly ourselves," Emma said, holding her mother's hands. "Papa would not want you fading away like this. He would want you to keep going, to keep making a difference, to keep being the strong woman he fell in love with." Victoria looked at her youngest daughter and saw the truth in her words. Asher would indeed be heartbroken to see her like this. He had always encouraged her to live boldly, to pursue her passions, to make her mark on the world. She owed it to his memory to do exactly that. So Victoria pulled herself together and recommitted to living. She could not have Asher beside her anymore, but she could carry his love with her, let it fuel her rather than weigh her down. She threw herself into her advocacy work, mentoring young women, supporting the library, staying active in her community. She spent time with her ever-growing family, delighting in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down stories and wisdom. She lived for another 12 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in March of 1946 at the age of 87. She had outlived Asher by nearly 13 years, years she filled with purpose and love. When her children went through her things after her death, they found journals spanning decades, documenting her life from those desperate days in 1880 through all the years with Asher and beyond. They found love letters exchanged with Asher during his occasional trips away from the ranch, tender and passionate despite decades of marriage. They found photographs, keepsakes, and a lifetime of memories preserved. Victoria and Asher were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the vast Oklahoma sky they had both loved. Their gravestone bore a simple inscription, "Together in this life and the next." The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations who continued to work the land and maintain the legacy their grandparents had established. The house became something of a family landmark, with descendants making pilgrimages to walk the same floors Victoria and Asher had walked, to sit on the porch where they had spent countless evenings, to feel the connection to the couple whose love story had started it all. Sarah outlived her sister by 2 years, passing away in 1948 at 87. Before she died, she compiled all of Victoria's journals, along with her own memories, into a family history that would be treasured for generations. She titled it "The Woman Who Came In from the Cold," and it told the full story of Victoria's near-death and miraculous rescue, of the love that bloomed from that desperate night, and of the family that grew from 2 people who chose each other against all odds. The story was passed down through the family, told and retold, embellished slightly with each telling but always maintaining its essential truth. It became a legend of sorts in the family, a reminder that life could change in an instant, that kindness mattered, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew Victoria and Asher personally still grew up hearing about them, still felt the impact of their lives. The values they had instilled, the emphasis on family, hard work, compassion, and resilience, continued to shape each new generation. The ranch they had built remained productive and successful, a testament to the solid foundation they had laid in the years that followed. As the 20th century progressed, and the world changed in ways Victoria and Asher could never have imagined, their story remained constant. It was a story of survival and second chances, of opening doors, both literal and metaphorical, of choosing love when it would have been easier to remain closed off. It was a story that reminded people that a single act of kindness could ripple through time, changing not just one life but countless lives across generations. The house itself, maintained lovingly by the family, stood as a physical reminder of their legacy. The porch where Asher found Victoria was preserved, and family members would often sit there in the evenings, watching the sunset and feeling the presence of their ancestors, who had sat in the same spot so many times before. By the time the 21st century dawned, Victoria and Asher's direct descendants numbered in the hundreds, spread across the country and beyond, but many still returned to Oklahoma, to the ranch, to the place where it all began. They brought their children and told them the story, ensuring it would never be forgotten. They walked the land, visited the graves, and felt the connection to a couple they had never met but whose love had made their very existence possible. The story of Victoria Flynn and Asher Dalton became more than just a family legend. It was written about in local history books, in collections of Oklahoma pioneer stories, in articles about the settlement of the territory. It became a symbol of the resilience required to build a life in challenging circumstances, of the power of human connection, of the way a single moment could alter the trajectory of multiple lives. But beyond all the grand meanings and symbolic significance, at its heart, it remained a simple story. A story of a desperate woman who thought her life was ending, and a kind man who opened his door. A story of two people who found each other when they both needed finding, who built a life together through hard work and devotion, who raised a family and created a legacy that would outlast them both. A story of love in its purest form, tested and proven through 50 years of partnership. The ranch continued operating well into the 21st century, adapted for modern times, but still maintaining the essential character Victoria and Asher had given it. The land they had worked was still productive, still beautiful, still holding the memories of everything they had built together. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right and the sunset painted the sky in golds and pinks, you could almost imagine them there still, Asher and Victoria, sitting on their porch, hands clasped, hearts entwined, forever together in the place they had made their own.